today to come to our policy meeting in the MPO. It's August 20th, and we'll call this meeting to order. Tracy, do you want to take roll?
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can.
Very good. I've checked in people that I've seen that have registered, so I'm just going to read people that I have not seen check in. So maybe I'll make it a little faster this time.
Great.
Do I have anybody from Clive, the city of Clive? Is Eric Klein here? Okay. Let's see. Dare County. Scott Sanders. Chris Coleman. Colton Fours from City of Elkhart. City of Grimes, Scott Mickelson. City of Indianola, Ryan Waller. City of Johnston, Jim Evans.
Here.
Thank you. City of Mitchellville, Tammy Delavue. City of Norwalk, Stephanie Riva.
Here. Pretty big pile out there.
County, Matt McCoy. City of Urbandale, Bob Andewig.
McCoy's here.
Hi. Bob Andewig. Kyle Michael, Van Meter. Aaron DeCook from Warren County. Darla Hugaboon. And is there anybody here from HERDA? Okay, thank you.
Tracy, thank you. Item number 3 is a vote on the approval of the agenda.
Move Willie. Move Willie.
I'll second it.
Thanks, Connie. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed?
Aye.
Abstentions? I'm sorry, was there somebody opposed? Abstention? Motion passes. Item number 4 is vote on the approval of the meeting minutes. Meeting minutes are from the June 18th, 2020. I'd entertain a motion unless we have any discussion or questions.
Move Walters.
Second, Randallman.
Thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention?
Aye.
Motion passes. Item number 5 is consent and vote on the approval of the financial statement. Todd, do you want to give us a lowdown on that?
Those were included in your packet. There wasn't a lot there. Normal financial transactions for the month. Pretty basic expenses for the month. I'd recommend approval.
Yeah. Any questions for Todd or discussion?
Move Willie.
Second, Randallman.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Abstentions? Motion passes. Item number 6 is the time for the public comment on any MPO actions. Is there anyone from the public that would like to speak? Go ahead and raise your hand, and we will we'll get you called on.
I don't see anyone.
All right. Item number 7 is a presentation assessing the ecological state of the 4 Mile Creek and Walnut Creek. Allison.
Thank you. We've invited Dr. Peter Levi from Drake University, who's been conducting 2 in-depth studies of the ecological state of these 2 creeks to present today as they are finally through with their first year of the study. So Peter, by all means, I'll hand it over to you.
Great, thank you, Allison. Is my sound all right, I hope?
Yes, sir.
Great, thanks, Joe. I really appreciate this opportunity to speak with you all today. I've been at Drake University for 5 years now, and I'm really excited about this project. I'll be working with Dylan to advance the slides here. And I just wanted to use this as an opportunity as well to just introduce myself, and hopefully those of you on the policy committee for the MPO can think of me as a resource when water quality or water issues come to mind, someone to reach out to. So this is just a flavor of what we're doing in Walnut Creek and 4 Mile Creek. I know going through a lot of your municipalities. If you would like to follow up about any of this, my email is here on the title slide as well as the last slide. So please do, by all means, reach out. What I hope to do today and the time that I have is to tell you a little bit about stream ecology, to give you the background to our study and to think about the dynamics of our streams here in central Iowa, and then show you some data that we've collected. So I always love to start out by thanking all the communities and the organizations who have supported our research. This is really fantastic that it is a community-based research. I'm training a lot of undergraduate students through this and doing a lot of public outreach such as this chat with you all today. So thank you to all of these organizations who have provided funding for this research. So when we think about streams, this is a natural prairie stream. I had to go to New Mexico on Google to find a nice picture of a natural prairie stream. We often think of streams and rivers as being influenced by the land that they flow through and also the climate or the seasons of the area they're located in. And when we think about streams, we might just think about the water going down the stream and the inputs coming from the landscape. Next slide. But as stream ecologists, we often think of streams in a much more dynamic way. There's so much going on. If we were to start to segment the stream into 100 meter, 200 meter, quarter mile pieces, we can start to think a lot about how dynamic they are. What are the physical aspects? How much water storage is there? What's the chemistry of that? How does it change from upstream to downstream, such as nitrate or milk, as it was this past week? And also the biology. What are the organisms within that stream and how do they change from reach to reach? Next slide. And then all of these different metrics that we can measure also affect the function of the stream. So that's something that I think about a lot, is how is the stream functioning? Is it healthy? Is it impaired? And how, if it is impaired, how can we improve that to get to a more healthy state? Next slide. So that, of course, is for a healthy stream. We can think about that. We can also think about how changes to land use and climate might affect a stream. So in a very agricultural area, of course, you can see that the riparian area or the area on the side of the streams is very modified. Oftentimes, the channel itself becomes more simplified, so it's more channelized, not as sinuous as a natural stream. It might also have flashier inputs, water getting into the stream much more quickly, leading to a large storm pulse moving downstream. Oftentimes, streams and agricultural watersheds have elevated nutrients. What we put on the land does find its way into the streams. And then all of those different physical and chemical changes do affect the biological community within the stream. Next slide. And all of those same things happen in urban streams. So we can think of all those same dynamics happening in an urban stream: change in nutrients, change in the physical structure of the stream, leading to changes in the biology that occurs there. And then, of course, how that stream functions, whether it's impaired or healthy. Next slide. So if we put all this together, the big question that I'm trying to address with my students through this research is how can we best manage streams in agro-urban watersheds? So the 3 main questions that I'm addressing over this 3-year research project is: how does water quality vary across different land use types, from agricultural to suburban to urban? How does it vary by season? How does it vary between years? We're experiencing drought conditions right now in Iowa, whereas we did not in 2019 last year. So that'll be an exciting comparison to make between those 2 summers. And then secondly, we can think about what factors out of the physical, chemical, biological are most influencing stream health. And then what's really exciting for me as a scientist here in central Iowa is that so many of the municipalities and organizations around are investing in streams and trying to improve water quality. So our research will also address the question, how do management practices improve or change the health of these streams that are going through our communities? That's where I put the little restoration box in there at the top as well. So I have 3 sites in both watersheds here. The 3 sites in 4 Mile Creek are, and again, the blue is indicating our agricultural, a site where the watershed upstream is agricultural. The orange box is demonstrating a site where the upstream is agricultural, but also very suburban with the city of Ankeny there. And then the downstream site is, of course, capturing a much more urban land use. And those, I can be more specific about where those are, but I just wanted to give you some aerial photos to see how that land use really changes as you go downstream in 4 Mile Creek. Next slide. And we can see the same thing in Walnut Creek, of course. So we also have in blue a agricultural site, the orange in Clive, where we have a sensor located in Walnut Creek, just south of Hickman. And then finally, we have a sensor located in the more urban part of the watershed at the intersection of Grand and 63rd, right at the border of West Des Moines and Des Moines. Next slide. So now I want to just show you a little bit of data on both the physical, chemical, biological aspects of the streams, what we've learned in 1 year. So the first thing I wanted to share with you all is this idea of flashiness. So when we modify the landscape, for instance, think about putting a huge parking lot in the watershed. When it rains, water is going to go from the landscape to the stream much more quickly. And that has really important implications for downstream flooding. If we can hold the water back on the landscape with pervious pavement or grass or natural landscapes, then the water will get to the stream more slowly. So what I want to show you is some data on the flashiness of 4 Mile and Walnut Creek. So just as an example, this is a photo I took on September 3rd of last year. And you can see 4 Mile Creek just south of the Renaissance Fair, just north of Scott Avenue, was really narrow, just a couple meters wide. Next slide. Same location 1 week later, we couldn't even go into the stream. The velocity was much higher, and we had just had 1 rain event, and it changed discharge dramatically. So again, flashiness is a measure of how quickly does water go from the land to the stream. Next slide. When we think about flashiness, we need a long-term data set. So thankfully, the United States Geological Survey has been measuring discharge on several streams in the metro area for the last several decades. So I wanted to start by showing you Beaver Creek, a primarily agricultural stream in of course, northwest Polk County and other counties to the northwest. And you can see that flashiness does not change in Beaver Creek. In fact, it might go down a little. So every year we can calculate how flashy, the RB index, how flashy is that stream for 1 year, and then you look at multiple years through time to see if there's a trend. Next slide. So the 2 areas that we did see a trend was in Walnut Creek. That USGS gauging station is located on 63rd Street, again, right at the border between West Des Moines and Des Moines. We see a positive relationship between the RB index and time. So the Walnut Creek watershed is getting more flashy through time. Water is going from the landscape to the stream more quickly. And we see that happening at the 4 Mile gauging station in Ankeny. That's a more limited data set, only from 2003. But again, you can see a pretty clear increase in that flashiness. Where we did not see an increase, as in Beaver Creek, was the 4 Mile site that was in the city of Des Moines, downstream. And you can see that that was steady across a 50-year data set from 1970 to 2019. One possibility for this, if you look at the Walnut Creek flashiness right next to the 4 Mile Creek flashiness, so you can see Walnut Creek is starting to get up to about 0.5, 0.6, whereas the 4 Mile site in Des Moines was already around 0.4, 0.5, 0.6. So I would suspect that maybe 4 Mile is not increasing in flashiness because it was already developed. We're not having a lot more development in the urban part of 4 Mile Creek, whereas we are seeing development around Ankeny, and for Walnut Creek, we are seeing continued development to the western suburbs of the metro. Next slide. So now just a little bit of chemistry. I thought this might be of interest. I wanted to present a little chloride data and then some nitrate data. So chloride, of course, is toxic if it's in too high of concentrations, right? We don't want salt water running through our streams. But of course, on the other hand, we also want our citizens to be safe, particularly in the winter. So what we can see here, if you look at those top two panels for 4 Mile Creek and Walnut Creek, the agricultural site is in green, the suburban site is in orange, the urban site is in gray. Those top two panels show concentration, and you can see that chloride concentration is highest in the urban location, and it especially peaks at both the urban and suburban locations in the winter months. So this is reflecting the runoff of road salt and de-icers. Again, very important from a public safety standpoint, and this just gives us an indication that we see that big pulse occurring in the winter as well for concentration. When we think about concentration alone, though, that's how much of the nutrient or element is within a liter of water. So one way to think about it, though, is discharge increases downstream. So you have more liters at the urban site. So we also calculate export, which are the middle two panels for 4 Mile and Walnut Creek, respectively. And that shows us how much the kilograms per day, how much chloride is going downstream on any given day. So again, you can see that it's by far highest in the urban locations. Sometimes there's over 60,000 kilograms per day going down Walnut Creek. You can see that was the maximum, whereas in 4 Mile Creek, it was about 30,000. Just for scale, that's 30 metric tons or about 60 US tons. So that's a lot of chloride going down these relatively small streams during storm events. And then the final two panels at the bottom show yield. So now taking that mass and correcting for the amount of upstream watershed. So again, urban sites are yielding the most chloride. Next slide. Nitrate, which is of high interest to many people in Iowa, shows a really seasonal pattern. So again, we can look at concentration on the top. Nitrate concentration is always highest at the agricultural sites. You can see the green dots for both 4 Mile and Walnut are always above the orange and gray dots. And there's a really large crash in nitrate concentrations in August of last year, and we're seeing that again this year. It always gets really low in the summer, creeps back up a little in the winter, and then you have your peaks in the late spring, early summer. The middle two panels, again, are showing export, how many kilograms are leaving the stream per day. And again, you can see 3,000 to 4,000 kilograms per day during the high parts. Oftentimes it's less than 100 kilograms per day, but that's a significant amount of nitrate, especially during those storm events. And then finally, when we look at yield, we see the pattern is kind of reversed from the export. Export is always highest at the urban sites. But for yield, we see that the agricultural sites are yielding the most nitrate per hectare. Again, nitrate, the source of nitrate is primarily a byproduct of agricultural activities with nitrogen fertilizer applied and then transformed in the soil leads to high nitrate levels and impairment in our waterways. So we're seeing quite a bit of nitrate coming from the agricultural headwaters, less from the suburban and urban locations. Next slide. So when we, one other way to think about the chemistry of these streams is to think about how much is being contributed from the upstream watershed at our most downstream point. So what I'm first showing here is how much of the water that we're measuring in discharge at the urban site is coming from upstream. So I have 4 Mile and Walnut here, and you can see that there's quite a bit of variation. In general, the agricultural site in 4 Mile contributes about 15% of the water to the urban site in 4 Mile. And the suburban site in 4 Mile, there's about 58% of the water, an average of 58% of the water that we measure at the suburban site is going downstream to the urban site. So this is just thinking about all the flow, what's the proportion that each part of the watershed is contributing. In Walnut Creek, it's about 1/3 from the agricultural headwaters, about another third from the suburban, which means another third of the discharge is coming from the urban part of the watershed. The reason I wanted to do this comparison with discharge is to show you the next comparison. So next slide, which shows nitrate. So for 4 Mile, we see now that while the agricultural part of the 4 Mile Creek watershed might contribute just 15% of the water, it's contributing on average 39% of the nitrate. Likewise, at the suburban site in 4 Mile, which contributes about 58% of the water, it's contributing about 84% of the nitrate. For Walnut Creek, we see an even shocking, more shocking skew in those data. The urban site in Walnut is receiving about 1/3 of its water from the agricultural location, but it's receiving on average 90% of the nitrate that's at the urban site in Walnut is coming from the upstream agricultural part of the watershed. So it shows how skewed nitrate is to the upper watershed relative to discharge, which is contributed throughout the watershed. Next slide. And I just wanted to provide that analysis as a slightly deeper analysis of what I'm doing. I'm trying to provide a really broad overview today. So, so that's just one way that we're looking at these data a little bit more closely. The last bit of data that I wanted to think about with the physical, chemical, and biological is some of the biological data. Here I'm showing data for E. coli on the y-axis, on the vertical axis. And of course, E. coli is a major concern. We're thinking a lot about central Iowa water trails in the metro right now. We're thinking about getting people on the waters and trying to make sure that we can ensure safety for the people who choose to recreate and interact with our waterways. And so one way that we can do that is measure E. coli. However, it takes several days to run a sample for E. coli. And of course, in streams and rivers, that water that you then find out might have been high or low in E. coli is already in Lake Red Rock or even further downstream. So scientists are trying to figure out, is there some other real-time metric that we can measure right now and have a general idea of what the pathogen or bacteria load of the stream is? So one idea is turbidity. How cloudy is the water? So the idea is that if there's more sediment in the water, there'll be more E. coli. What we found in 4 Mile, you can see the highest E. coli concentrations are actually in the middle of that figure. So all of those dashed lines do point up, but if you look, the highest points in the green, orange, and gray are all in the middle segment of the turbidity, not necessarily at the high end of turbidity. So turbidity wouldn't necessarily tell us when 4 Mile at any of those 3 locations has a high E. coli burden because E. coli seems to decrease as turbidity further increases in 4 Mile. However, at the urban and suburban sites, the gray and orange dots in Walnut Creek, we can see that the highest E. coli concentrations also correspond to some of the highest turbidity values. Whereas at the agricultural site, it's actually decreases, E. coli decreases as turbidity increases. So this starts to show the more nuanced problems that we have with trying to figure out how to ensure that people will be safe recreating in the water. I will note that E. coli in general is sort of a terrible predictor of pathogen burden to humans because many forms of E. coli will not get us sick, whereas several other forms can get us very sick. So, so as a general indicator, there's a lot of people who argue against it, but we do need something. So that's something I know the Central Iowa Water Trails is working on now. Next slide. The last set of data that I wanted to show you regarding 4 Mile and Walnut Creek is to think about the health of these streams. And so I mentioned at the onset that as a stream ecologist, I think about function. So how is the stream reach functioning? Is it healthy? Is it impaired? And the way that I do that is measure whole stream metabolism. So a little just real brief introduction to this metric. And again, I'm happy to follow up with anyone afterwards. Just as we have a metabolism, we need to take in food and drink every day, and that gives us energy to live our lives. Ecosystems too have a metabolism. So an ecosystem needs to create energy. That's what's done by all the plants in the ecosystem, like algae in a stream. And then everything else, like the bacteria, the fish, the bugs, are what's using the energy. And so what we do is we measure oxygen concentrations on a daily basis. And I'm showing a whole 6 months of data for Walnut Creek there, and then a little subsection of just 1 week. And you can see that every day, oxygen concentrations increase during the day because a byproduct of photosynthesis is oxygen, which we're very thankful for, that the plants create that for us. And then you can see that oxygen crashes at nighttime because oxygen is being used up by all the things like bugs, bacteria, and fish in the stream. So every day we have a peak and a trough. So we use those data then to determine the health of the stream. Next slide. So I know that this slide looks quite busy, and I just want to quick describe it. We have 4 Mile at the top, Walnut at the bottom. The panels on the left are the agricultural sites. The panels in the middle are the suburban sites. The panels on the right are the urban sites. So as I said, we can calculate a production and a respiration value for every day of the year. And I put in dashed lines that represent where the poor health, the satisfactory health, and a healthy stream would fall. These distinctions were made by several scientists a few years ago by using a collection of a lot of streams worldwide to come up with these thresholds. And I'll just quick point out that high production and high respiration is considered poor health because you do not want a stream that's just full of algae, right? No one would want to be in that. That's how you would get really high production if you have a lot of algae. And so what we can see in general, if you want to push the button, Dylan, next slide. I circled some points there for both 4 Mile and Walnut at the agricultural sites in summer last year in 2019. There were quite a few days where both streams were considered poor health, that production got too high. Next slide. If we look at this past spring, both 4 Mile agriculture and 4 Mile suburban, the top 2 panels, again, those sites in 4 Mile were impaired in their health. They were considered poor health, likely too much algal production. Whereas in Walnut, we do not see that at either the agricultural suburban site. So this is just, again, an idea of the wealth of data that we're collecting with this project and how we're able to tease apart how these streams are functioning. Are they healthy? Are they impaired? And again, what is predicting that? Is it the amount of nutrients? Is it the algae? Is it the discharge? So that's just a feel for the research that we're doing here and thinking of these streams from an ecological health standpoint. Next slide. So if I were to summarize what 1 year has taught us, I'd say that some metrics had really consistent patterns across sites and seasons. When we think about nitrate, for instance, chloride, those patterns were really consistent as we'd predict and expect. Some metrics varied by land use type, again, chloride and nitrate as well. Some metrics had apparent patterns at some, but not all the sites. So think of the E. coli and turbidity relationships. We saw a positive relationship at the Walnut suburban and Walnut urban sites, but not in 4 Mile at any of the 3 sites. And based on those data I just showed you, for the majority of the year, 4 Mile and Walnut at all 6 sites that we're measuring these data were in good or satisfactory condition, with 10% or so of the days in poor health. So all in all, I was impressed with the health and general quality of the sites from an ecological function standpoint of these 2 urban and agricultural streams. Next slide. And the last thing that I just wanted to make people aware of that we're doing in the area right now is we're using this aquatic drone that you can see. This is one of my students, Paige, operating it in collaboration with some Department of Energy colleagues at Oak Ridge National Lab in Tennessee. Next slide. This is a really fantastic piece of equipment. We have some real-time sensors on there to determine what water quality is by the meter and minute. So we're driving it down some agricultural streams that are going to have saturated buffers and conservation practices put in this fall. So we have some data from this summer, and then we're going to look at it next summer to see how much did these ecosystems improve given these conservation practices. Next slide. And this is just nitrate data from Alleman Creek. Alleman Creek is a tributary to 4 Mile Creek. This is just north of the town of Alleman. And you can see some hot spots of nitrate. This is nitrate concentration across 2 kilometers, about 1.5 miles of stream. And you can see that there's some points, especially where tile inlets occur, you can see real hot spots of nitrate. And then finally, the next slide, you can see how it changes in just 9 days. I'm showing the inset there of the data I just showed you. So 9 days later, we can see that there's different hot spots, and we can see that water quality really does vary. This helps us determine how should we sample these sites. If we always sample from the same road crossing, is that giving us a good representation of what the stream quality and health is? Final slide. So again, that's my email address. I try to squeeze a lot in there, as well as some background to stream ecology. So I really appreciate this opportunity to meet and chat with many of you. And please do reach out if you'd like to continue the conversation, if you have any questions, or if you want to see even more, because this was just a brief sampling of what we've done.
Doctor, thank you very much. Appreciate all the information. Any questions?
Super. Well, thanks again for this opportunity to chat with all of you. It's always a pleasure for me to talk to the policy folks that are making things happen in our communities. And please see me as a resource for any questions you might have down the road.
Great. Thank you so much. Appreciate your time.
Absolutely.
All right. Item number 8 is a report and vote on FY 2021-2024 Transportation Capital Improvement Program. Aspen.
Thank you. So I'm just going to give a brief overview of the TCIP report, which should have been in your agenda packets. The report has changed slightly since we sent it out based on some comments that we received from the executive committee, which I will go over. But we're just going to go over the summary and the project types and then show the maps of the complete metro area and all the projects that are happening. So the overview of projects, you can see we had most of our member governments submit projects to us this year, which is good. And so we have slightly more funding in this year's report than we did in last year's report, but we had 2 or 3 additional communities submit projects this year. So that is a little bit why those numbers might be different. We did collect hazard mitigation projects. However, they are not included in the final report because they're not necessarily transportation projects, but they are capital improvement projects. And with our contract with Polk County, we're collecting that data. And so rather than send out 2 separate requests for that data, just when we sent out the request for the TCIP projects, we figured we'd collect that data as well. So that's why they're not included in the final draft of the report and not included on the maps. Next slide. You can see the breakdown of funding by project type. Of course, roads and parking lots continue to be where most of our funding where most of our dollars are being spent. A little bit different from last year is that bridges and pedestrian streetscape projects bumped up to the 2nd and 3rd highest categories for where we're spending money, whereas last year it was roads, intersections, and pedestrian streetscape projects. And then funding by fiscal year, a lot of that is estimates, especially given that a lot of cities are not quite sure what their budgets will look like for next year and the following year. Given what's happening with coronavirus. So those are just estimates. Next slide. This is the project map, which again, what is not included in the final project, which I couldn't update this slide before the meeting today, but the hazard mitigation projects are excluded from the final report map. And so those projects are taken out, but we still have that data. So if anyone is interested, we have it. We just won't include it in this final map. And then next slide is where our spending is in our EJ areas. So we have about, and this is the exact same as last year, both of these numbers equated to about the same. So 16% of our population lives within EJ areas, and 11% of our overall capital improvement spending will occur within EJ areas. However, the projects that were reported as citywide or various locations that didn't have specific locations, I couldn't necessarily map. And so that funding is not included in how I calculated this number. So for instance, if the city of Pleasant Hill or Des Moines is doing a citywide traffic safety improvement, I didn't include those numbers in this because I didn't quite know, okay, well, where are these happening? So this is a little, you kind of have to take the 16% with a grain of salt here, but it gives you a good idea of where these projects are happening. And with that, I will be happy to answer any questions.
Aspen, thank you. Any questions? I got some feedback from something. Any comments or questions for Aspen? All right. That is a voting item, so if we don't have any comments or questions, I would entertain a motion.
McCoy, so moved.
Second, Jones.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion passes. Item number 9 is a report, fiscal year 2020 end of the year financial report. Todd.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Our annual report, our budget, excuse me, goes from July 1st to June 30th. So we thought after the fiscal year had wrapped up, we would present you with kind of where we stood at the end of our last fiscal year. Our primary funding source for the MPO, just as a reminder, is US DOT grants on a reimbursement basis. Go ahead, Dylan. This was in your packet. It's a little hard to read on the screen, I understand, but overall we were within our budget. A few items kind of stand out by the percentages. Equipment, we had a server that needed to be replaced that we hadn't anticipated. Publications, Des Moines Register raised their rates a little bit, and we had some extra things, meetings and projects that we had to publicize. So we had a little more expenditure there. What else? Strategic plan. We did that salary survey last year. Our travel demand model, we did some extra work on it as we did the long range plan to update some of the processes that are inside that. So a little more funding was spent on that than we anticipated. But again, overall, we were well within our budget. And then the transload revolving loan from the Iowa DOT, we still have about 77% of that left over being spent this current fiscal year. And we actually just did a reimbursement to them earlier this week. So that was processed by the DOT. Happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Todd. Anybody have any questions for Todd?
Good job to the staff. I'll move acceptance of the financial report if it's a.
I think it's just a report. It's not a voting item, right, Todd?
No, it's not. But thanks, Chris. Anyway, appreciate it.
Thank you. All right, we'll move on to item number 10 is a report from the Iowa Clean Air Attainment Program pre-application. Zach.
Just wanted to give you a quick update on the ICAP applications that were submitted. The deadline to get the pre-applications in was July 28th. We received a total of 6 applications for ICAP funding. They're listed on the screen before you there. Des Moines, Norwalk, Dart, Altoona, Ankeny, and Grimes all submitted applications. Included in your agenda packet was a table that included more details on each one of the projects. Again, just wanted to give you an update on this. We'll be bringing back the pre-applications next month for the committee's approval. And then once we get the approval from the committees, we'll send the resolutions on to the project sponsors so that they can submit them to Iowa DOT by the October 1st deadline. But if you have any questions about the ICAP pre-applications or any of the projects that were submitted, I'd be happy to take those questions at this time.
Zach, thank you. Any questions for him? All right. We'll move on to item number 11 is a report, Des Moines area MPO 2019 travel time reliability and freight reliability report. Z.
Yeah, thank you. So I'll just briefly go through the reliability report that was included in your agenda packets, starting with the background. So in 2017, the Federal Highway Administration finalized a series of performance measures for state DOTs and MPOs to report. These performance measures included system performance measures and freight performance measures. Under system performance measures, there are two required metrics. The first is the interstate travel time reliability. This is measured by the percentage of person miles traveled on the interstate that are reliable. The second metric is the non-interstate National Highway System, or NHS, travel time reliability. This is measured by the percentage of person miles traveled on the NHS that are reliable. In terms of system performance, reliability is defined as the 80th percentile travel time divided by the 50th percentile travel time of a road segment. Next, moving into freight performance, this metric is measured by the Interstate Truck Travel Time Reliability Index, and reliability in this context is defined as the 95th percentile travel time divided by the 50th percentile travel time. Next slide, please. So these system performance measures and freight performance measures relate to the MPO's LRTP goal number 1, to manage and optimize the transportation infrastructure and services. In the MPO's LRTP Chapter 2, you can find the MPO's 5-year targets and also the 2050 targets for these performance measures. Next slide. So a brief view of the MPO's 2019 performance versus the MPO's 5-year targets and 2050 targets. In terms of the 5-year targets, the MPO was able to meet 1 of the 3 targets. And in terms of the 2050 targets, the MPO was able to meet 2 of those 3 targets. Next slide. So we'll look at each of these metrics in a bit more detail, starting with the interstate travel time reliability. The MPO set a 5-year target for interstate reliability at 100%, and the MPO was able to meet this target first in 2017. But then in 2018 and 2019, the MPO performed slightly under the target at 99% and 97%. So this underperformance is just a bit under the 100% level, and it's quite hard to always perform at 100%. So this slight underperformance shouldn't be too alarming. In terms of the MPO's 2050 target, the MPO set the target at a 95% level, and the MPO area has been meeting this target since 2017. Next slide. The second metric is the non-interstate travel time reliability. The MPO set a 5-year target for this at 66% and has been meeting this target since 2017. And for the 2050 target, the MPO set it slightly higher at 75% and has also been able to meet this target since 2017. Next slide. Lastly is the interstate truck travel time reliability. The MPO set the same target for its 5-year target and 2050 target at a 1.28 level. The MPO has met this target both in 2017 and in 2018. However, in 2019, the MPO slightly performed under this target at a 1.33 level. Again, similar to the other targets, this performance is only a bit under, and so this underperformance isn't too alarming. Next slide. So the MPO is now continuing to report on these performance measures and other performance measures on a more regular schedule. As soon as data for these performance measures become available, we'll be reporting them out to the various committees. If you have any questions on these performance measures, I can take them at this time.
Steve, thank you. Any questions? All right, a lot of good stuff there. Thank you. Item number 12 is a report on the transload facility update from Zach.
I want to give you an update on where we're at with the transload facility. We are in the process of just wrapping up the environmental assessment. The public comment period was finalized on July 27th, We only received a couple of comments on the EA, and none of them were substantial according to the FRA. So the responses to those comments will be included in the finding of no significant impact, which has been drafted and reviewed by the FRA. I think we're close to having that finalized as well. Essentially, all we're waiting on at this point for the EA to be completed is for SHPO to finish their review of the document. And this will be the second time that they've seen it. So we're expecting them to provide their feedback any day now, really. So that's really the only thing we're waiting on as far as the environmental assessment goes. Des Moines Industrial has also received a final engineering sign-off from the railroads. So again, that was another piece that we were waiting on, and now that has been completed. The grant agreement is in a similar situation. Just waiting for the EA to be finalized. We have the draft of that's been completed for several months now, just waiting for the EA to be completed. So once the FONSI is completed, we'll be able to finalize and sign the grant agreement. We've also been working on a sub-agreement with Des Moines Industrial for the build grant between Des Moines Industrial and MPO. We've been working with Scott and DMSI's lawyers as well to develop that. And Scott, I don't know if you have anything you want to add about that agreement, but I think we're pretty close to having that finalized as well.
Yeah, we should be done here in the next couple of weeks.
Okay, excellent. Next slide, Dylan. So as far as next steps go, as I mentioned, just waiting to finalize that FONSI as soon as SHPO gets their comments back to us, and then finalizing the build grant agreement. As far as moving forward after that, the Des Moines Industrial, I believe, is prepared to start working on groundwork as soon as the grant agreement is finalized. And they'll do as much as they can in the fall before the weather turns. And then the plan is to really get construction rolling as early in 2021 as the weather permits. So that's kind of where we're sitting at with the transload facility right now. I'd be happy to take any questions about any of the EA or the FONSI or the sub-grant agreements, any of those that you'd like to have questions on. I'd be happy to take them at this time.
Thanks, Zach. Any information? I know that we're very close. I had an opportunity to have a conversation with Chris Kramer today, and I know that we're very close with the SHPO and the FONSI. So hopefully we'll be getting that wrapped up.
Yep. Like I said, hopefully we'll hear from them any day now.
Yeah, I think we will. All right. If there's no questions or comments, we'll move on to item 13 is the Purple Heart Highway update. Todd.
Yeah, thank you. HNTB is finishing their quality control work on the traffic operations and safety analysis. Those should be finished. They also are doing the research on the overweight and slow moving vehicles. That should be wrapping up as well. The cost estimates are updated. We should have a little less cost in this compared to the 2012 report. Some of the standards and criteria have changed in our favor. So hopefully the costs have come down on some of those things. We expect the draft report by tomorrow. So hopefully we'll have that, and then we can share that out as we get it. Be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Todd? All right. We'll move on to item 14 is a report on water trails update from Todd.
Yeah, thank you. Project is continuing on its original schedule. We are trying to get an extension on the build grant piece of this with some changes to the federal designation, but that'll have to keep working its way through that process. We did receive the ARPA permit from the Corps of Engineers to look at Prospect Park. That was one of the things we needed to be able to get that. Prospect Park is owned by the Corps and managed by the city. That environmental review work is now underway. The draft build grant agreement with FHWA is being reviewed by both DOT and Federal Highway. It's going through a little different process, oddly enough, than the transload agreement, but we're working that through. This week we received a lot of the design information and cost estimates, and the city's been reviewing that with the design team. Also looking at how the compensatory storage for the floodplain is being dealt with at Scott Avenue. I don't know if there's another slide, Dylan, or not. Thank you. So the draft CE has been sent to the DOT for review. Preliminary design is being reviewed and will be over the fall. Assuming all that moves forward, we'll have plans to the DOT early next year, and then start a contract discussions later in next year. The cost estimates for this portion of the project have come in high. There's been a lot of stuff added to it, so the teams are in the process of going through and seeing what's absolutely needed and what's kind of a nice to have, and maybe another phase of the project at some point. But what do we need to have to make this a successful project? Is currently we're kind of where we're at right now. We have to answer any questions.
Is there any questions for Todd? I know we had a brief summary from Maggie and Hannah yesterday at our strategic planning. I'll just say that I believe that this project is a lot different how it's been handled throughout the process, and I'm hoping that we're able to fulfill some of these deadlines from some of the things that we heard yesterday. It's going to be a challenge. So I'll just throw that out there.
There's a lot of work to do.
There is a lot of work to do. Anyone else? All right. Item number 15 is a report from a legislative update from Dylan.
Thank you. So the current federal transportation bill will expire in September. So there has been some work to get a new transportation bill passed. The House introduced their version of the bill a couple months ago. The Senate, though, and the administration said they're not going to take it up, and they haven't yet. However, the House did pass their FY21 appropriations bill at the end of July. It also has not been taken up by the Senate yet. So we'll be watching that when the Senate reconvenes to see if they take that up or if they pass a continuing resolution here in the next couple of months. There's also been some work regarding the proposed COVID-19 relief bill called the HEALS Act by the Senate, and there are some provisions in there that are transportation related. One of interest would allow recipients of 2018 build grants, which would include our Transload grant, to receive another year to obligate the funds. I don't think we're going to need that based on the update Zach just mentioned, but it's there. And there's some work underway by our staff working with the partnership and working with our congressional delegation to try to get that to include the 19 funds as well, which would include the water trails, the dam funding. There's also a few other minor things. There's a bipartisan committee to look at the status of the Highway Trust Fund and try to get that in better shape in this bill, oddly enough. One thing of note is that there is no funding, or real mention of transit or passenger rail. So a lot of the transit advocates and so forth don't like that aspect of the bill that's been brought up. So just something to note. And I think that's all I have for a legislative update. If there's any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Is there any questions for Dylan? All right. Item number 16 is report on upcoming events. Gunner.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very happy to tell you about the next speaker in the Tomorrow Plan Speaker Series, James Chung. He's coming back to Des Moines almost 2 years to the day from when he was here in 2018. He's the president of Reach Advisors, and he has U.S. cities as clients around the country, and he dives very deep into data sets that he says the U.S. government doesn't even have in order to help them suss out competitive advantages among their peers. And at the time, he said that Des Moines kind of found him in all these comparisons that he was doing with other U.S. cities. Des Moines would rise to the top and stand out as a statistical overachiever. And at the time, he really challenged people to challenge the Metro to keep going. today, of course, the world is totally different just 2 years later. And he's coming back to help re-engage the city and think about what advantages do we retain? How do we pick up some of that momentum? I'm really excited for this one. He was by far one of the most best received speakers that we've ever had. Really, really engaging. And importantly, in this era of in this era of virtual events where you can see anybody from around the world, this is going to be hyper specific to Greater Des Moines. So I think it will be very valuable to anyone who participates. And I do hope to see several of you on the call. It is a virtual event. We'll have registration up on the Speaker Series website. It is not there today if you go looking yet. We're still finalizing a few details, but we want to give you a heads up so you guys can mark your calendars for the morning of September 23rd, a Wednesday. Please note it is early in the morning as opposed to our typical lunch hour, and that's just when we were able to get Mr. Chung. That's it for me.
Thanks, Gunnar. Any questions for Gunnar about the event? All right. Item number 17 is other non-action items of interest to the committee. Anyone have anything?
I have one.
All right. Go ahead.
It's Allison. I'm just letting everybody know, many of you are already on the D-list listserv from Polk County Emergency Management. But if you didn't notice, there are 2 funding opportunities for hazard mitigation projects that have come up, and you can start to pull your project together. Both applications, one is mostly for flood mitigation. The other is actually looking at more resilient communities. So retrofitting and things outside just flood mitigation. But either way, your projects do need to be in the hazard plan. If they're not at this point, you can take those through the Polk County Emergency Management and have the plan amended very easily. Reach out to myself or AJ or Cameron over at Emergency Management. And one of the hoops is that Iowa Homeland Security will need to review these documents by December 31st. So you'll have to submit through them, and then they'll go on to FEMA. So we just wanted to make you aware. If you haven't received any of this information, please reach out and I can forward it on to you. Thanks.
Thanks, Allison. Any questions? Anybody else have any non-action items they need to share? All right. There's nothing else. Our next meeting date is September 17th at 4 o'clock. And this meeting's adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.